It's safe to say that gamers really love physical copies of video games. There's just something special about owning a game, putting the cartridge into your console, seeing it on your shelf, and knowing it's yours. But since the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, a lot of developers, and even Nintendo themselves, have started using something called game keycards, and let's just say the community has not been happy about it. If you don't know what a game key card is, it's basically a cartridge that doesn't actually contain the full game. Instead, the cartridge acts like a key. When you insert it into your Switch 2, the system downloads the game onto your console, and then the cartridge has to stay inserted in order to play it. So technically, you're still buying a physical game, but the actual game data isn't really stored on the cartridge itself. Now, personally, I own a few game key cards, and honestly, I don't hate them. You still have to put the cartridge into the Switch to play. You still get the game case. You can still display on your shelf. To me, it still feels more like owning a physical game than simply buying something from the eShop. But I completely understand why so many people dislike them. The biggest complaint is pretty obvious. When you buy a physical copy, people expect the game to actually be on the cartridge. Instead, you're getting what feels like an empty cartridge that simply tells the system what game to download. For a lot of collectors, that's a huge disappointment. But before we talk more about why people hate game keycards, let's talk about why developers are using them in the first place. A lot of it comes down to money. At launch, developers reportedly had access to larger cartridge sizes, and manufacturing those cartridges isn't free. So let's use a game like Puyo Puyo Tetris as an example. Imagine a game that's only a few gigabytes in size. If the only cartridge available is much larger than what the game actually needs, then a lot of that storage space is simply being wasted. The publisher still has to pay for the cartridge, even though they're only using a small fraction of it. Now imagine you're selling a game for $40 instead of 70 or 80. Every dollar matters. Spending extra money on a large cartridge when your game doesn't need all that storage starts to look pretty expensive. That's why game keycards make sense from a business perspective. The publisher can reduce manufacturing costs while still selling a box version of the game in stores. The problem is that what makes sense for a company doesn't always make sense for the customer. And that's exactly what game keycards have become so controversial. I think there's three major reasons people dislike them. Number one, preservation. What happens 20 years from now? One of the biggest advantages of physical games has always been that they continue to exist even after digital stores shut down. You can still put an old cartridge into a console and play it. With a game keycard, the actual game has to be downloaded first. So what happens if the servers are gone someday? What happens if Nintendo eventually shuts down support for the Switch 2? A lot of gamers are worried that future generations won't be able to access these games as easily. Number two, you're buying a physical copy, but the game isn't actually there. This is probably the most common complaint. Imagine buying a movie on Blu ray only to discover that the disc contains almost nothing and requires a massive download before you can watch it. Most people would feel cheated. That's how many players feel about game keycards. They see the cartridge and assume the game is on it, only to find out later that it's really just a download key. Number three, it defeats one of the main reasons people buy physical games in the first place. For many gamers, physical copies aren't just about collecting, they're about ownership. When you own a cartridge with the game stored on it, it feels permanent. A game keycard doesn't provide that same feeling. Instead of owning the game itself, it can feel like you're owning a physical representation of a digital download. And for collectors especially, that's a big difference. Now, even though I understand all of these complaints, I'd still choose a game keycard over buying it digitally from the eShop. At least with a game card, I still get a case and a cartridge. I still have something physical to put on my shelf years from now. Even if the game isn't fully stored on the cartridge, it still feels more tangible than a completely digital purchase. But I don't think game keycards are the perfect solution. Personally, I think Nintendo should offer more cartridge sizes. Imagine if developers could choose from 5 gigabytes, 10, 16, 32, and 64 gigabyte cartridges. Smaller games could use cheaper cartridges, larger games could use even bigger cartridges. That would solve a lot of cost issues while still allowing developers to put the actual game on the cartridge. And we've seen Nintendo use different cartridge sizes before on the original Switch, so the idea isn't impossible. Would it completely eliminate game keycards? Maybe not, but I think a lot fewer developers would choose them if the cheaper cartridge options were available. At the end of the day, game keycards exist for a reason. Developers save money, games can still be sold in stores, and consumers still get a physical box. But for many players, that's not enough. They want true physical ownership, they want game preservation, and most importantly, they want the game they pay for to actually be on the cartridge. So now I want to hear from you. Would you rather buy a game keycard or just download the game digitally from the eShop? Do you think Nintendo should keep using them or should they find another solution? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!